ولا إله إلا الله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ولقد خلقنا الإنسان من سلالة من طين ثم جعلناه نطفة في قرار مكين ثم خلقنا النطفة علقة فخلقنا العلقة مضغة فخلقنا المضغة عظاما فكسونا العظام لحما ثم أنشأناه خلقا آخر فتبارك الله أحسن الخالقين. ثم إنكم بعد ذلك لميتون ثم إنكم يوم القيامة تبعثون. ولقد خلقنا فوقكم سبع طرائق وما كنا عن الخلق غافلين. وأنزلنا من السماء ماء بقدر فأسكناه في الأرض وإنا على ذهاب به لقادرون. فأنشأنا لكم به جنات من نخيل وأعناب لكم فيها فواكه كثيرة ومنها تأكلون. وشجرة تخرج من طور سيناء تنبت بالدهن وصبغ للآكلين الأنعام لعبرة نسقيكم مما في بطونها ولكم فيها منافع كثيرة ومنها تأكلون وعليها وعلى الفلك تحملون صدق الله العظيم.
Thank you very much, Brother Yaqub Sharif. May Allah bless you. Now I will request Brother Amir Ali, Dr. Amir Ali, to read the translation of the verses which have been recited.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. In the name of God, the most beneficent, the most merciful. The verses Brother Sharif has recited, they have been taken from chapter 23. This chapter is called Al-Mu'minun. And the verses are recited from number 12 to 22. And these verses have relevance to tonight's talk about creation or evolution. As we Muslims would like to call God Allah, the most praised one, he says in his book, verily, we created man from a product of wet earth, then placed him as a drop of seed in a safe lodging. Then fashioned we the clinging droplet, to a little lump. Then fashioned we the little lump bones. Then clothed the bones with flesh, and then produced it as another creation. So blessed be Allah, the best of creators. If you allow me a brief comment here, these verses were revealed 14 centuries ago when the science of embryology was not known. And all the scientists have examined these verses very closely and found to be correct according to modern science. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues, then, lo, after death you surely die. Then lo, on the day of resurrection you are raised again. And we have created above you 7 paths, and we are never unmindful of creation. And we send down from the heaven water in measure, and we give it lodging in the earth, and lo, we are able to withdraw it. Then we produced for you therewith gardens of date palms and grapes, wherein is much good for you and whereof you eat. And a tree that springs forth from Mount Sinai, that grows oil and rich for the eaters. And lo, in the cattle there is verily a lesson for you, We give you to drink of that which is in their bellies, and many users have you in them, and for them do you eat. And the last verse he recited, and on them and on the ship you are carried.
Itself, Islam, the name of the religion, not Mohammedanism, but Islam, coming from the root word silm or salam, meaning peace, submission or obedience, and Islam itself specifically implying that peace is obtained through submission, to surrendering oneself not to the powers that be, but to the power of the Almighty, to God. So Islam is the name mentioned in the Quran as the name for the religion. This, of course, distinguishes it from, in some sense, from Christianity, because the word Christianity itself is not used in the Bible saying this is the name of a religion. Likewise, the name Judaism is not used in the Torah or in the Old Testament saying this is the name of a religion. Perhaps some Christians have decided to call Islam Mohammedanism because they have chosen to take Christianity, meaning from the root word Christ, like Christ, or Judaism coming from Judah. They may have thought that the religion of Islam or the Prophet Muhammad should appropriately have been called Mohammedanism. But of course it is not. God himself has called this religion Islam. And we must distinguish between Islam and Muslims. Between what the ideal is, Islam, the religion itself, and those who adhere or practice this religion are called Muslims. Muslim being a person of peace, one who surrenders or submits himself, who yields to the laws of God. Okay. One who submits and who... Okay. One who submits himself to the will and the laws of God as they are articulated in the Quran. We have to distinguish between Islam, Muslims, and Arabs. There are some 200 million Arabs. Some Arabs are Christians. There are over 1 billion Muslims in the world. One does not imply the other. In other words, not all Muslims, of course, are Arabs. I am not an Arab. There are Malaysians, Pakistanis, Indians, Europeans who are Muslims but who are not Arabs. Likewise, not all Arabs are Muslim. Approximately 90% of them are Muslim, but some of them are not Muslim. Some Arabs are Christian. And generally those Arabs who are Christian call God by the same name that the Muslims do. They call him Allah. And so we see some of the cultural things, some of the things we may be getting from the press, suggesting somehow that the name Allah may be distinguished or different from what we commonly call God in English, or implied they're false. So the central entity in the Islamic religion is not Muhammad. The central entity or being in the Islamic religion is the supreme being, and that is Allah. And Allah is just the Arabic word for the name of God. And there's something special about this name Allah, which makes it dear to Muslims, and why they sometimes may use Allah and God interchangeably. Still the name Allah tends to be dearer to them. I was talking to a speech therapist who was telling me that the most basic sound a human being can make is ah, ah. He opens his mouth, he vocalizes, no shaping of the lips, no movement of the tongue, just letting air pass through the throat, comes out the sound ah, ah. And in making this sound for the name of Allah, you have to raise the tongue up to the roof of the mouth, and then the tongue rests itself at the floor of the mouth. And so the tongue itself, even in saying the name God, Allah, the tongue makes prostration inside the mouth of the person, worshiping God even as you say his name. So this is one of the reasons, among many others, I'm sure many Muslims can tell you other reasons, why this name is particularly dear to them. Even saying his name, there is praise. So Allah is considered one, not three in one, not 1 in 3, not 4 in 1, not 12 in 1, but only 1 in 1. And we say sometimes Allah, our Lord and God, is one. He has no mother, no father, no son. He shall not end, nor was he ever begun, and of his equals there are none. So we know in Islam the purity of unity, of the divinity is emphasized. And sometimes this places us at odds, of course, with those of our Christian friends who may believe that the divinity extends to more than just God, also to one of God's servants, Jesus, and to the Spirit, which they call the Holy Spirit. They include this in the divinity sometimes, at least the Trinitarian Christians. The Unitarian Christians, of course, believe in the unity similarly to the way that the Muslims do. In Islam, we also, of course, need to recognize, most Muslims do, the existence of the last of God's messengers, Muhammad alayhi salam, peace be upon him, who was born in Arabia approximately 570 and who died approximately 63 years later after having received over a course of some 23 years, revelations from God which were recorded by his contemporaries, which again is unlike the Bible, recorded by his contemporaries into a book form which we now have with us, which we call the Quran, or as we see it written so often, the Quran. This being a recitation from God through the angel Gabriel to Muhammad. And so this Quran becomes the primary source of authority in Islam for the laws. In Islam, there is no such concept as separation of church and state, which we hear quite a bit of when we're referring to Christianity or to Christian countries where Christians predominate. And this is because in Islam there are laws which govern the state, laws which govern economics, laws which govern relationships between husband and wife. It becomes a very comprehensive way of life and not merely just a set of beliefs. Islam is a comprehensive set of rules which encompass not only things concerning the body and the mind, but also the soul, and also social relations with others who have similar concerns. So there is no separation of this type. Not only is there the concept of the oneness of God, there's the oneness of mankind as well. God created all human beings, and the Quran emphasizes He made them of different colors, different languages, such that they may know each other, not that they may despise each other. So there is none of this racial antagonism espoused by Islam. I'll also point out, of course, we know racial antagonism and ethnic antagonism is not espoused at all by Christianity, even though we may find it prevalent among Christians, and we recognize that as well. Certainly it was not a part of the teachings of Jesus. And so we believe also, like Christians and the Jews, in the day of judgment, that there will be a day in which men and women will have to account for their behavior. Their beliefs as well will have to be accounted for, and all that they have done. And God has the power to assign them to an eternal punishment or an eternal reward for having done the deeds that they have performed, which is again similar to Christianity, so there's not that much difference. I could go on. There are at least 5 pillars of Islam. The belief or testimony that one believes in God and Muhammad was his messenger, came with the message of God, is the first of the pillars. The second being salat, or prayer, which is a sort of a ritual prayer organized and performed such that the body moves in harmony with the soul to demonstrate submission to God. A Muslim, as I mentioned about the tongue standing up and then lowering itself to the roof of to the floor of the mouth, a Muslim raises his body erect, and in praising God, he will go through various postures while he's reciting God's words, praising God, ultimately ending in the most submissive form, which is called prostration, as he praises God in prayer. And then there's fasting, which is a period of about 30 days, which is to commence approximately next Wednesday or so, where Muslims would abstain from eating and drinking all liquid, and even from smoking for those who smoke for all daylight hours for approximately 30 days. And then there is a purifying tax, which is attached to property which has been held for a period of 1 year, and there are rules regarding it to be distributed among the poor and the needy to help those who are in the need of that kind of help. And finally, the fifth being the pilgrimage or Hajj, where Muslims from all over the world re-emphasize the fact that they are one community, and they meet together in Saudi Arabia, in Mecca in Saudi Arabia, at the place where Abraham stood, and the place where Abraham and his firstborn had built an an altar and prayed to God. So these are some of the salient aspects of Islam. There's nothing to be feared about it. It is a belief system, a value system, a set of beliefs controlling every aspect of life. And God willing, you should learn more about it while you're with us.
It is my pleasure to introduce to an eminent international scholar, Dr. Maurice Bucaille, who is sitting next to me. However, there are a large number of people who may not know him very well because they are not the people in this field. Dr. Maurice Bucaille is a native of France, and he studied medicine and specialized in surgery. He has great interest in Bible all his life, and he read Old and New Scriptures much in detail, and he mastered the knowledge very well. Through his contacts with his patients, some of them happen to be Muslims and some other people, he got interested in reading Quran. And during his studies of French and English translations, there were things which did not make sense to him. He was invited to learn Arabic and read the book Arabic because Quran is something which cannot be translated. And you know that translation of Quran is not Quran. Quran is Arabic. If anyone wants to know about Quran, Arabic is the only way to know Quran. You must learn Arabic. During his studies, at age 50, he took upon himself to start learning Arabic. In about 2 years, he was beginning to read Quran in Arabic, and he studied the whole book. As a scientist, he picked out the verses which reflect upon scientific facts. And as he had done before with regards to Old and New Testament, he compared the scientific reflections in the scripture with the modern scientific knowledge. And he found certain things which were great revelation to him, and he decided to write books. He wrote a book in French which was subsequently translated, the Bible, the Quran and Science. This is the pocket book edition available. We have hardback available outside. If you are interested, you can buy a copy when you go out. And he also tackled the problem of creation versus evolution. Quran had something to guide, something to say, and he came up with another book. What is the origin of man? And there is a topic of his tonight, and he will know in detail what he has to say about it. Of course, he cannot say the whole book. He has to summarize it in 1 hour. And if you want to know all the details, the available book is available outside, and you can buy that one. He has just finished a third book about the medicine and pharaohs, mummies of pharaohs in Egypt, and that is in process of publication. And he's also giving talks on that, and we do not have much time for him to give a talk on the topic. He has created much interest in France, and 2 of his books in French have become bestsellers, and they are selling very good. And the Christian churches are recommending to their membership to read his books. And regarding this, what is the origin of man, I have a letter in front of me which has been translated from French to English, so I can read to you.
Commentary.
It's the official commentary of the Christian Church, Christian Book Office. This translation says, regarding his book, What is the Origin of Man by Dr. Maurice Bucaille, in order to read this book, one requires a certain command of science and exegesis. The aim of the author is to eliminate mistaken ideas concerning the origin of man, such as man descends from apes, the Bible is wrong, there's in quotation. The merit of the work is that it demonstrates the lack of opposition between science and the Bible or the Quran. This part of the book is perhaps the most interesting for those who have no knowledge of the Quran. Dr. Bucaille's book is to be used as a tool for groups studying the first chapter of Genesis. Ladies and gentlemen, with this note, I leave this place for Dr. Maurice Bucaille. Please come over here.
Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you very much for your kind introduction. It is my pleasure to be among you this evening. I visited Chicago for the first time 2.5 years ago. It was a short stay in Chicago, and it was my pleasure to visit you again. Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. Man questioning himself on the origin of his species initially had at his disposal for reflections, traditions and superstition passed on from generation to generation, and for which the source material is lost in the darkness of time. In a secondary stage, and before science was in a position to shed some light on the problem, as it is the case in our days, religious teachings and various philosophical systems brought elements for reflection. We must emphasize the influence on the human mind of the teachings of the scriptures of the three monotheistic religions. During many centuries, the only source of ideas consisted of notions drawn from them. The divine revelation was initially communicated by word of mouth and then in written form. One can only speculate on the date at which man became aware of the first revelation. As to the manner it came to him, are we not permitted to suppose that Noah was the first to bring this subject to the attention of his people? The Bibles make a reference to this fact, and we take from the Quran the idea that the first call to man to meditate on its origin was made by Noah. The most ancient text of the Holy Scriptures that we possess and which deals with human origins as creative work of God are without doubt based on what we presently know about the two Yahvist and sacerdotal narratives of the Bible. The Yahvist version of the Bible, the most ancient one, is today considered to have been written in the 9th or 10th century before Christ. The most recent version, the sacerdotal version of the Bible, is the work of the priest of the 6th century before Christ. It contains the lengthy narrative of the creation placed at the beginning of all the copies of the Bible. Christianity naturally took up the idea of creation and repeated the biblical teachings concerning the origin of man, without offering more details on this issue than those contained in the Old Testament. Nevertheless, there is an exception for the genealogies of Jesus, especially in the Gospel of Luke, tracing back to Adam and showing Jesus preceded by 76 generations of human beings, which today is untenable. The Quranic revelation considerably enriched man with data about himself, as it did otherwise for all the works of God concerning the creation and organization of the inanimate world as well as the living world. Thus, during many centuries, on the question of the origins, human mind in the West fed itself, if I may say so, on biblical teachings. Whereas in the Islamic world, the Quran, in the meantime, brought not only the general idea of the creation common to the three monotheistic religions, but also further teachings concerning man himself, new teachings, since non-existent in the Bible, and to which I will refer later. The next stage is when, during the 18th century of the Christian era, science registered its initial major progress. As soon as man came to possess scientific knowledge, even rudimentary and really insufficient to arrive at a formal conclusion, this, nevertheless, led him to develop various speculations. The error of most of the scientists in their way of reasoning lies in the fact that they strictly apply to the case of man the findings which have not even a definitive significance for the animal kingdom. They did it from pure analogy. This fault in the drawing of conclusion explain what will follow, jointly with their fondness for ideologies. Thus the philosophers did not hesitate to construct theories which were founded on very fragile bases. This is also observed today. In the West, the 19th century was the time of the first disputes with the religious teachings, essentially with those of the Bible, particularly bearing on the fixity of the species through the ages, clearly formulated in the Old Testament. Lamarck, introducing his theory of transformism at the beginning of the 19th century, was the first contender of the biblical statement about the fixity of the species. But it was above all Darwin, in the second half of the 19th century, who dealt a severe blow to the biblical data with his theory of natural selection, supported in his book on the origin of species, which appeared in 1859. Darwin had supposed that nature was spontaneously able to bring forth living beings like those whose appearance may be favored by cattle or horse breeders through selected interbreedings. In his reasoning, Darwin forgot that these breeders cannot produce animals of a species different from the species of the parents. Darwin was right when he said that he had observed variation within the species he met in his trip through the oceans on board of the famous ship, the Beagle. But these variations were observed in animals belonging to the same species. At no time did he find a change in a species which resulted in the formation of a new species. In order to explain evolution in the animal kingdom, we need know what gives rise to the transformation of one species, of one order, etc., into another. Darwin himself, in a letter preserved at the British Library, London, a letter with hypothesis photocopy, Darwin had stated quite clearly that he was aware of having failed to explain evolution. I quote Darwin, "But I believe in natural selection not because I can prove in any single case that it has changed one species into another, but because it groups and explains well, as it seems to me," said Darwin, "a host of facts in classification, embryology, morphology, rudimentary organs, geological succession, and distribution." Unquote. In this way, Darwin confesses that evolution cannot be explained by his theory. All the problems of the value of the work of Darwin lies right there. The centenary of Darwin's death was commemorated in 1982 by a host of apologetic pronouncements, absolutely out of keeping with the importance of his work in the history of natural sciences. In my book, What is the Origin of Man? The Answers of Science and the Holy Scriptures, I have shown the deficiency of Darwin's theory and the misuse made of it by contemporary commentators of his work. Today, the existence of evolution in the animal kingdom is perfectly demonstrated. The evidence has been given in innumerable cases, with many details concerning the transformations in the course of time, for example, from the reptilians to the mammals. But Darwin never proved that man descends from ape. Moreover, he did not ever write it. His followers, among them Haeckel, in 1869, claims this without the tiniest argument, for no link has ever been formed between human and animal lineages. We shall come back later to this point. Supporters of modern theories like neo-Darwinism or the synthetic theory of evolution do their best in order to combine the far-fetched obsolete data of the idol with genuine findings of our knowledge. But in no way do they bring together all facets of the problems in their reasoning. They draw conclusions from certain aspects taken from data collected in laboratories where present-day microorganisms are studied, without taking account of the concrete facts of past events. That is to say, the documents provided by paleontology, that is to say, study of fossils, and corroborated by other disciplines such as zoology, embryology, comparative anatomy, genetics, cellular and molecular biology, etc. In fact, we observe the birth of theories supported by scholars who describe them as depending purely on science, but which only translate the compromises with their personal philosophy. In this field in France, we are well placed to note to what extent famous specialists in molecular biology, like Jacques Monod or François Jacob, worthy, however, to have received a Nobel Prize in medicine, could have taken liberties with the facts in order to satisfy their materialistic desires. One knows the fantastic organization which rules the functioning of the cell and commands the evolution in the animal kingdom. How can we agree with François Jacob when he considers evolution as a result of makeshift arrangements in his book, The Game of Possibilities? Or can we agree with Jacques Monod, since he upheld the theory of a chance and necessity as explaining everything? It is not possible to admit the determinative role of chance when we know that the organization of a living being is much more highly complex than any producer or any programmer of computers might imagine. I cannot here give the numerous details which I have dealt with in several chapters of my book. Nevertheless, one must insist upon several data concerning life from a general point of view and the functions of the cell. Here, I should like to remind you of several notions which you are not aware of, since to draw a parallel between them is highly instructive. To assert that life might have occurred spontaneously on Earth is an absurdity. To say that it came from space is without any scientific basis. Most certainly, experiments like those of Miller in 1955 were able to demonstrate that very small amounts of chemical components having high complexity, like amino acids of cellular proteins, might be produced artificially. In a gaseous atmosphere made of hydrogen, ammonia, methane, and water vapor, electrical discharges of high intensity might have produced samples of those components, but it is not the life which is obtained for all that. The reasoning of Miller is erroneous, for there is a right gap between bringing the compounds to combine together in a chemically ordered fashion and producing the fantastic complex we call the cell, or even more rudimentary living organisms. A statement such as this is tantamount to saying that the possibility of spontaneously forming steel particles from iron ore and coal at high temperature could have automatically led to the construction of the well-known Eiffel Tower in Paris, or other towers that you know well in Chicago, through a series of happy coincidences. This series of happy coincidences would have assembled the materials in proper order, and the result would have been to obtain what was, for the Eiffel Tower, a triumph of metal construction almost a century ago. And we must note that the structure of such a tower is much less complex than the most simple cell. Each cell possesses, if I dare say, its computer. The orders for innumerable functions are given by molecules through which a program is elaborated, including reproduction. In the nuclei of the cells, a proteinic macromolecule, the desoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA, is the basic element of a system having a tremendous complexity and producing the catalysts triggering specific chemical reactions. The specificity of the latter depends on chemical components which hook onto this basic substance. By this way, coded orders are sent by chemical messengers, and after decoding, specific enzymes are produced, leading to the synthesis of proteins which are necessary to life. The genes are segments of DNA to which chemical compounds are appended. Each cell possesses a considerable number of them, ordering innumerable activities, so the genome is constituted. Even the living organisms, which have not a nucleus like the bacteria, have such a system of command. In the cells, there is a tape of DNA folded over on itself a great deal of times. By this way, thousands of different kinds of proteins may be produced, about 3,000 for bacteria like Escherichia coli. In the case of Escherichia coli, the length of the tape of DNA is 1 millimeter. 1 millimeter, that is to say, 5,000 times the maximum size of the bacteria. In human beings, where the size of each cell is drawn to a scale of thousands of a millimeter, the cumulated length of the tapes of DNA of all the cells of the body is exceeding several times the distance between the Earth and the Sun. More exactly, today one estimates that this accumulated length might be equivalent to more than 15 times the distance between the Earth and the Sun. In other words, an evaluation made in astronomical terms. It is not inconceivable that in the future a precise inventory of the genes in man would be drawn up. One estimated today that in order to carry out such a plan, 1,000 researchers, engineers and technicians would have to work on it during 30,000 years. If we suppose that every chemical basic compound, that is to say in the present case every nucleotide, will be represented by a letter in books having collected the information only concerning a human being, one will need 2,000 medium-sized books, each one of 500 pages. You easily imagine the length of shelves of the bookcase. And behold, such a fantastic number of data are contained in every nucleus of our cells, whose size is evaluated on a scale of thousands of a millimeter. Its volume is so tiny that if the whole genetic inheritance of the approximate number of 5 billion human beings living on Earth were gathered in order to form a whole, the total mass would not exceed a volume of 1 cubic centimeter. Is a human brain in a position to conceive such a miniaturization in computer programming? The basic characteristic of the living organisms is the fantastic organization. The genes order the functions of every cell. While man is able voluntarily to influence certain aspects of the function of the organs, in the animals, most of the functions are totally automatic due to an extremely sophisticated programming in certain cells in the nervous cells of the birds, for example. Their very complex migrations are under the dependence of a prodigious stocking of information, inducing automatic behavior. We know the extremely reduced volume of the central nervous system where the program is registered. Through such an example, we have an idea of the capability of living matter necessitating a prodigious organization. Where can we situate the origin of life? As far as we know, the most likely hypothesis is an aquatic origin. Algae and bacteria existed 1 billion years ago. The Earth is 4.5 billion years old. Other microorganisms were found in rocks dating back 3 billion years. Pluricellular life forms more probably developed from unicellular forms. The most primitive pluricellular beings are likely to have been the sponges, which although not possessing clearly differentiated organs, already display a reproductive organization that is sexual. From these primitive forms probably derive others possessing rudiments of organs and cells that have acquired nervous and muscular functions. They are likely to have been formed less than 1 billion years ago. The first invertebrates probably appeared 500 or 600 million years ago, along with mollusks, annulated worms, and the first insect. The vertebrates came later, roughly 450 million years ago, and likewise certain fishes which continued to develop thereafter. The first terrestrial vertebrates, amphibians and reptiles, appeared some 350 million years ago, and following them came the mammals 180 million years ago, and the birds 135 million years ago. This brief survey showed the magnitude of the evolution in the animal kingdom toward ever more developed and complex forms in a perfectly ordered manner, suggesting that its explanation by chance is impossible. The genetic code which controls the function of each of our cells is the director having control over all transformations that arrive in an orderly, non-chaotic manner. When a new characteristic appeared in evolution, this was the obligatory reply to an order from one or more specific genus. Evolution has perpetually been the creator of increasing complex forms among the animal and the plants. Thus, when one studies the infinitely small in living being, one arrives at the notion that everything is entirely programmed at the level of the genetic code, exercising its control over extremely complex functions in connection with anatomic modifications. How can the existence of a programmer be found incompatible with science? Even further, how can an objective and impartial scientist of our age avoid the impossibility of explanation of this extraordinary arrangement of the phenomena of life, which would depend on the notion of chance? Or then, can one rely on whole formulae, preconceived ideas such as Darwin natural selection, which in no way explain that we know today of evolution? What characterizes a living being is the information recorded in the genetic code. The latter contains the specifications concerning its morphology and functions of every kind. Evolution, as we know, is quite obviously dependent on a process of successive additions of informational data over the course of time. Scientists can argue ad infinitum about the causes determining the fact, but they cannot get away from the fact itself because it is patently obvious. When certain of today's theorists who claim to have an explanation for everything are asked just where the point of departure or origin of genetic information lies, they are at a loss for words. How could they fail to be? Jacques Monod has acknowledged the inability to explain it in his book, Chance and Necessity. I quote Jacques Monod: "The major problem is the origin of the genetic code and the mechanism by which it is expressed. Indeed, one cannot talk so much of a problem as of a genuine enigma." Unquote. Lamarck and Darwin did not provide an explanation for the genesis of the broad basic divisions of the plant of animal kingdom, each of which arrive at an organizational plan for an entire lineage. Fortuitous changes in the genes do not adequately account for the emergence of major variation. They cannot create new forms with modifications that affect organs in a coherent manner. All of these events took place in a very long stages. At the beginning, there appeared the first signs of particular features, followed by a period of accentuation of these phenomena, which was rounded off by a phase during which events slowed down and the creation of new types finally ground to a halt. At the present time, we would appear to be in this final stage, as we shall see later on. However, in the case of man's transformation, transformation came to a halt more recently. All the major organizational types were laid down at a very early stage. From the moment a type engendered certain form that oriented themselves in a particular direction, no new organizational types emerged from specialized forms. In his book, The Evolution of Living Organisms, Pierre-Paul Grasset wrote, I quote, "Creative evolution has its roots in prototype forms. Without them, no new types of organization can ever appear," unquote. At the cellular level, evolution raises questions which can now be answered by molecular biology and genetics. No new phenomenon can occur in the cell without the intermediary of DNA molecules, which by means of ribonucleic acid, RNA molecules, is responsible for the formation of proteins that constitute the origin of chemical synthesis. For every important morphological variation, the DNA molecule must acquire a new active gene, thus adding to its fund of chemical held information, or modification must occur in a gene that already exists. Professor Grasset, who was for 30 years teaching evolution in the animal kingdom at the University of Paris, emphasized upon the fact that the most primitive living being could not genuinely and substantially have contained within itself all the genes of the animal. The same for the vegetable kingdom. For him, the acquisition of genes is the absolute prerequisite for evolution. What happened, as far as we know, concerning the human species? Here we must report findings and not theories, in order to make a valid comparison with the statements of the Bible and teachings of the Quran. According to the firmly established notions provided by the study of human fossils, bones and teeth, the remains which have been identified lead us to think that about 4 million years ago in Africa there existed living beings gifted with intelligence, not only using tools. Certain animals are capable of this, but even making tools to be used, a capacity of invention achieved by no animal. These first hominids were called Australopithecines. I think that this designation, which is beginning to date, is not correct, for it suggests a link with the apes from which they obviously differ. However that may be, they had a morphology similar to us in numerous respects. Biped posture, for example, although they were much smaller and had a skull capacity of only about 500 cubic centimeters. According to today's knowledge, they represent the most ancient generation. But it may not be excluded that future discoveries will push even further back the date of man's first appearance on Earth. We do not exactly know when this first wave died out. 1 million years from us, 600,000 years ago, we do not know. The second wave was that of the Pithecanthropes, or Homo erectus, identified in Africa, Asia, Indonesia, and Europe. Their size was closer to ours, with a larger brain, about 900 cubic centimeter in average. They discovered the use of fire. They will have existed during periods ranging from 5,000 to 150,000 years before our time. With the third wave, Neanderthal man, whose remains were found in Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and Java, the brain develops even to exceed the human brain of today in volume. This wave, it seems, was of a shorter duration, between 100,000 and 40,000 years. At around this latter age, the fourth and last wave appeared, bringing in 2 days Homo sapiens, who seems to have evolved very little to date. A negative fact is of the utmost importance. We have never found the link formally joining any one of these forms to any animal lineage, even an intermediate between primates and the lineages that I have just mentioned. At the International Congress of Paleontology, which took place in France in Nice in October 1982, this point was clearly emphasized. Starting with our common ancestor, modification must have taken place for us to end up with different types of the same species. Within the human species, I repeat, within the human species, an obvious evolution has occurred. An impartial observer is therefore obliged to recognize the happening of such events. Throughout the course of time, there have been modifications of the human form, but in no way does this signify that we descend from apes as the adepts of Darwin's have claimed. From the Bible, I have retained as perfectly valid the idea of creation which is emphasized in its text. Nevertheless, as to the present value of the integrity of its narrative of the events, something entirely different is considered. The longest biblical narrative of the creation, in fact there are 2 of them in the Bible, describes, as I have shown in my book, The Bible, the Quran and Science, the creation by God described as the creation by God of the animals by presenting the various species are fixed through the ages. Moreover, the chronological data of the Bible lead to evaluate the age of creation of the world and the appearance of man on earth at about 57 to 58 centuries ago. In 1987, now, the Hebrew calendar places them at 5,747 years ago. None of these statements is scientifically acceptable. However, one readily conceives that for the Bible it could not have been otherwise. When dealing with such subject, the biblical authors of this narrative, the first one at the 9th or 10th century before Christ, are recognized by the Christian exegetes themselves as indeed inspired by God, as far as the truth of the theories are concerned, but having written following the ideas, traditions, superstition, or myth of their age about other subjects. How in this circumstance can they have not committed errors concerning facts on which no scientific light was shed prior to the modern era? It is not therefore astonishing that the Second Vatican Council, 1962-1965, declared that the book of the Old Testament might, I quote this declaration of the Second Vatican Council, might, I quote, contain material which is imperfect and obsolete, unquote. The concept of creation of man is often discussed by those who emphasize the resemblances between man and the apes or other supposed ancestors from the points of anatomy and various functions. By this way they suggest that we might be their descendants. They forget that these similarities were imposed on man, who of necessity was obliged to live in the same surroundings. We take the word in its broadest sense, which means our earthly environment with its geographical variations. Thus man needed a respiratory tract similar to what constitutes the latter in other animals which consume oxygen in the air, or a digestive tract to ensure its nutrition from the food provided by the ground or the flesh of other animals on which man depends, just like animals are depending on others. These essentials of life lead to similarities in functions, physiology, biology, and a host of common characteristics. Without these morphological and functional resemblances, man could not have survived on Earth. Taking into consideration today's firmly established data of science, we cannot find a disagreement between them and the religious teachings about the creation of man, this concept being shared by Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike. Islam has brought additional teachings concerning man in the Quran. In my last book, What is the Origin of Man, I have repeated that these statements on man were those which impressed me most from a scientific point of view. I even delivered a lecture on this subject in 1976 at the French Academy of Medicine. Now I have fully developed all these elements into books. When dealing with the origin of man, I cannot fail to evoke how the Quran teaches us, in a more general sense, on the starting point of life. I will only quote the verse of the Surah Al-Anbiya. أَوَلَمْ يَرَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا أَنَّ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ كَانَتَا رَتْقًا فَفَتَقْنَاهُمَا وَجَعَلْنَا مِنَ الْمَاءِ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ حَيٍّ أَفَلَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. Do not the unbelievers see that the heavens and the earth were joined together when we clothed them asunder, and we got every living thing out of the water? We do not believe. Who today does not know that the origin of life is aquatic? Furthermore, I believe I distinguish in the Quran allusion to transformation of human morphology taking place in sequence in different phases as modern science demonstrates. These verses have become accessible to human understanding only in the modern era. The ancient commentators, as well as today's translators and commentators, could not and cannot grasp the real meaning. Only a scientist understands. I shall not emphasize the well-known spiritual sense attached to the creation of man from the ground, which appeared in many verses. But the Quran evokes, after the creation, a second phase wherein God gave form to man. This Surah Al-Araf. لَقَدْ غَلَقْنَاكُمْ ثُمَّ صَوَرْنَاكُمْ ثُمَّ قُلْنَا لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ اسْجُدُوا لِآدَمَ. We created you, and thereupon we fashioned you. Thereupon we told to the angels, bow down to Adam. Man was fashioned harmoniously. Such is the mention of Sawa, which applies to man in the Surah Al-Hijr and the Surah Sad. Moreover, in the Surah Al-Infitar, it is specified that الذي خلقك فسواك فعدلك في أي سورة ما شاء ركبك. God is the one who created you and fashioned you harmoniously and in due proportion. In whatsoever form he willed, he made you out of components. I will follow with the quotation of verses which speak for themselves, if I may say so. من سورة التين لقد خلقنا الإنسان في حسن تقويم. We created man according to the best organizational plan, for I suppose that such is the meaning of taqweem. As to the following verse, Surat Nuh, وَقَدْ خَلَقْنَاكُمْ أَطْوَارًا, He created you in stages. I have suggested in my last book that atwar, which appear once in the Quran, could be related to the transformation undergone by the human species throughout the ages. Indeed, all those who have studied embryology are well aware that it is in the uterus of the mother that are outlined, then settled, all morphological transformation which will fully develop in the adult. The stages through which the embryo passes in the uterus, to which one generally relates the word, are just as applicable to the entire human lineage. Finally, when one has in mind the data provided by the study of fossils concerning the successive waves of human types in the history of our species, how can one not compare these two verses of the Quran with these findings? Surah Al-Insan, where God speaks of men. نحن خلقناهم وشددنا أسرهم وإذا شئنا بدلنا أمثالهم تبديلا. Verily we created them and strengthened all of them. When we willed, we replaced them completely by people who were of the same kind. From Surah Al-Anam, in Yasha, يذبكم ويستغلث من بعدكم ما يشاء كما أنشأكم من ذرية قوم آخرين. If God wills, He destroys you, and in your place appoints whom He wills as successors, just as He brought you forth from the posterity of other people. These two verses consequently emphasize the disappearance of certain communities and their replacement by others in accordance with the will of God through the ages. What greater compatibility can one find between the Quranic teachings and the perfectly established data of science in the field of paleontology and many other disciplines? Let us remember that they were absolutely unknown at the time the Quran was brought to the knowledge of men. Such is the important lesson that any objective scientist must draw from these facts when we have a valid awareness of the origin of man, or could we come to any other conclusion? Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you very much for your kind attention. Assalamu alaikum.
Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar.
While the questions are being collected,
After you speak, please eliminate all the questions which are not in cause in the relationship. Otherwise,
we reconcile Australopithecus as being the earliest human on earth, and the teaching that Adam, according to Adam, made in the most perfect way, according to the religious, was the first man on the earth.
it is an excellent question, but I suppose that the author had forgotten quotation of the Quran, what I have recited. At first, now we suppose that the Australopithecus is the most ancient man known. But we are not sure at all that in the years to come, and maybe later, after that stage, we might be in a position, paleontologists might be in a position to discover other forms. We suppose that is the most ancient one, but for the future we do not know what will be the discoveries. And second part, in the Quran you have a verse I have quoted from the Surah Al-Araf, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَاكُمْ ثُمَّ سَوَّرْنَاكُمْ. We created you, and thereupon, summa, we fashioned you. So that there is absolutely no contradiction between what I told you concerning the most modern discoveries of paleontology and the teaching of the Quran you have quoted.
The next question is, what inconsistencies do you find in the Quran?
No. This is it is not about the matter of the lecture.
I am requesting you to ask question concerning this subject, please. Somebody asked about the healer. We don't want to answer this kind of question. Scripture.
No. It's too long.
The question is, according to a scripture, the age of human being is estimated 10,000 years. But according for science, the age is in millions. Do you have any explanation regarding the possibility of creating different human beings before Adam's? Do scriptures deny that man could create a different form from the present one?
Something is clear, something is not clear. It is not at all conform with the modern discovery that the age of man is 10,000 years. No, not at all. No. The man appeared surely much in more ancient times. I have explained that very clearly. And so that there is absolutely, according to science, this age is in millions, of course. But it is according to scripture, the age of human being is estimated in 10,000 years. Not at all. Not at all. For the Bible it is less, and the Quran does not teach the least thing concerning the age of human being on this earth. Have you an explanation regarding the possibility of creating different human beings before Adam? Not of course, because if Adam is the first one. To designate Adam, the name Adam is to designate the first man who appeared on that earth. There is no question about that. The last part I cannot answer because the scripture deny that man could be created, I suppose it's something is missing in different form
from the present
one. The scripture, but there is nothing in the scripture where we are denying that. But it's a fact that man is man, and you have not to imagine men other than the men that we know. So I cannot understand.
Is there in the Holy Quran about the origin of animals?
The Quran is not a book of science. We describe the animals like a book of science. You have nothing in the Quran concerning the origin of animals. It's the Quran, it is said that we have a creator. The animals have a creator also. But you have not that in the Quran. But
protoplasm, as claimed to be the basis of life, existed in clay. Quran in Surah Rahman describes that man has been created by means of fine particles of clay. The surah is quoted, خَلَقَ الْإِنسَانَ مِنْ صَلْصَالٍ كَالْفَخَّارِ. If the theory of evolution is wrong, can we not quote this saying as an indication that Quran has referred to the evolution of primitive creatures made of protoplasm?
But I suppose that the author of this question does not know at all what is a protoplasm. Protoplasm is in each cell something which outside the nucleus. To imagine protoplasm that is absolutely in contradiction with all that we know since several decades. But I have not to answer about this protoplasm. But when it is said that Surah Rahman describes that man has been created by means of particles of clay, yes, it is to indicate that the constituents of our body are, that is to say, the atoms, are exactly the atoms which might be discovered and which were discovered in the earth. There is no problem of evolution in that. And I have made a difference between evolution in the animal kingdoms and the transformation of the human species created by God. And you made a mixture of everything, and exactly if you had not heard what I have said, I have given the answer before.
Does the modern science confirm the Quranic verse which states that God made every living thing from water?
Yes, but
and is the Bible consistent with this theory?
The Bible said nothing about that, but it is, I have explained, I have said, I suppose very clearly that everybody now suppose that the origin of life is aquatic. I have said that, I have given the answer.
I read of another theory of evolution with step changes. This was proposed to account for the gaps in Darwin's species of. Is it possible that the step changes were caused by Allah's will and one of the step changes led to the creation of Adam?
I have explained in detail this problem of the genes which are at the origin of any modification in a cell. So that now this theory of Darwin was an ancient theory at the time. we did not know the least thing concerning evolution. Now with molecular biology and with genetics, there is no problem to explain the least thing concerning evolution in the animal kingdom by the theory of Darwin. Darwin, it's finished with molecular biology and genetics.
When God says we created you, does not we refer to the Trinity or multiplicity of God?
No answer.
As it is evident that Adam was created from clay or elements of earth crust, it is absolutely necessary to know how the creation of elements or particles or atom was done in light of Holy Scripture. Please comment.
I have answered to the question by my lecture. I cannot give another lecture because I have explained all that in details. I cannot give you an explanation. I have to repeat what I have said.
Is there any contradiction between the biblical teachings and the origin of man other than the date?
I have said concerning the Bible that the concept of creation was shared by the three monotheistic religions, but what cannot be accepted concerning living beings in the Bible is at first the fixity of the species in the animal kingdom and the date of the origin of man. But the Bible does not contain so numerous teachings as the Quran. The two important teachings in the Bible were precisely about these two questions. And since the author of the Bible have written their books in close conformity with the concept of their day, with the tradition of their time, the scientific error, what appear now as scientific error in our day, were absolutely unavoidable. Excuse me, that does not mean at all that from a religious point of view, many teachings of the Bible are not at all to be taken into account. I am speaking only about the subject matter of this lecture.
Can all the theories of evolution be accepted or reconciled with the position of those who believe in creation?
Personally, I am a believer in God, I am a believer in the creation, but I think that from a scientific point of view, there cannot be any doubt about evolution in the animal kingdom and transformation in the human species. The two things are perfectly compatible and being not at all a contradiction between one and another.
The similarity of man and animal in anatomy and physiology is because of the same living condition. So you say man adapted to this system or man was created on this system?
Yes, of course. Man was created according to the necessities for the man to be in a position to survive on this earth.
Genetically, man and the great apes share a great volume of similarities. There are also recent findings such as Lucy and other connecting links which link clearly man with his ancestral apes. Does Quran say that man was not evolved from the ancestral apes?
Well, I have explained exactly this possibility of evolution as it appears in the Quran. For the third time, I shall repeat, وَلَكَدْ خَلَقْنَاكُمْ ثُمَّ صَوَّرْنَاكُمْ, and I might repeat other quotation of the Quran I made in Arabic. like man was fashioned harmoniously, the word sawa, and many quotations of the Quran I gave you to explain you that it was a transformation in the human species.
What are the similarities and differences of the Bible, science and Quran? I don't know, it is not related.
You have to read the book. It's too much. Too much differences, I cannot give an answer.
In Quran, many times it is mentioned that Allah has not created anything purposeless. How do you account for the presence of vestigial organs in the human being which are quite functionless according to the modern science?
Yes. It's very difficult to say that an organ might be absolutely vestigial, like you have written, because they are it's well known in physiology that necessarily in the course of the embryology concerning human beings and the animals, there are organs which at a certain time are useful and later on are not useful later on in the course of the life of animals as well as of human living beings. Considering, for example, the lymphatic system, we are considering some glands like the thymus, you can know thymus, which is a vestigial organ in adult and has the most importance for the growth of an infant. Alors, so that it's difficult to imagine that several things were created, were conceived by God without any use. I think that you cannot find a demonstration of that. And it is necessary to know in detail the comparative anatomy to our full of admiration for the wonderful organizational plan according to which we have been fashioned, as the Quran said.
What about the
It's not out. Not the subject matter. We have too many questions.
also this is regarding the coming book?
When is Dr. Bucaille's new books going to be published, and approximately when will it be available in America in English? I am in a position to tell you that the book to come in French, Medicine and Memories of the Pharaohs, I translate. The publisher promised me to publish it in next October, and I hope that since the English text is finished, I hope, inshallah, to have an American publisher. But until now, I cannot tell you the least thing about this project.
Are Adam's and Eve's literal or symbolic representation in the Holy Quran scheme of creation?
Is not symbolic because there was the first man and the first female, the first male and the first female. The male was called Adam, the female was called Eve. It is, of course, symbolic names, of course, but the creation must have a beginning. I cannot tell you because it is the habit for in the scriptures to give a name. Then you have the name of Adam in the Quran, you have the name of Eve in the Bible, but as far as I know, you have not the name of Eve in the Quran, the name of the wife of Adam. You see, there is nothing to to conclude from this defense.
Unless you want to take some more questions.
Anybody concerning the subject matter?
It's not directly concerned.
If it is not directly concerned, excuse me, because I want at first to answer questions which are directly in connection with the topic of this lecture. If you have, with pleasure.
No, it's not concerning the lecture.
No, it's not.
Looks like we are getting out of question. There are some questions which are really out of order, This is why I'm not reading.
Finished, but just before the tomorrow, very early. We must give a lecture until tomorrow.
I'll give you one more chance before we close. Anybody has any question? Write down your question, please. Write down and send to us.
The last one is finished. I must leave very early tomorrow morning, but I must leave. I must leave very early tomorrow morning. I have a lecture to give in Toronto tomorrow.
As well as on behalf of the Institute of Islamic Information and Education, it is my privilege and honor to welcome you, Dr. Maurice Bucaille, to Muslim Community Center of Chicago. I also like to thank all the participants tonight. I hope that this lecture has given you some thoughts, some ideas about the creations of human being on this earth. And I also like encourage you to read his books. They are very informative, especially this Origin of Man as well as this Bible, Science and Quran. With these short notes, we will adjourn. The Salatul Isha will follow immediately. Therefore, please join me in dua. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا وأخطأنا ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا ربنا لا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار وصلى الله تعالى على خير خلقه محمد وآله وصحبه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.